delegations of Chile and Bolivia are already in The Hague and will present their arguments before the judges today over the use of the waters of the Silala River. The process will be extended for 14 days. In the United States, President Joe Biden announced that another 30 countries will join the strategy of releasing crude oil reserves to stabilize the market. Less than 50% of Rwanda's population has access to clean drinking water within 30 minutes of their homes, according to UNICEF. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Caracas, Venezuela, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. And now we begin. The delegations of Chile and Bolivia are already in The Hague and will present their arguments before the judges today over the use of the waters of the Silala River. The process will be extended for 14 days. Chile will be the first to present the case, while the Bolivian representation will have the opportunity to respond on Monday 4th. Chile filed a lawsuit against Bolivia over the status, course, and use of this natural resource. They consider that the Silala is an international river that should be shared, while Bolivia maintains that the waters originally come from springs born in its territory that were artificially derived towards the border in the first half of the last century. In these pleadings today, Chile will insist on the rights it claims to have over the tributary, according to what Chilean co-agent Carolina Valdivia told Chilean media. And now we move on. In the midst of the electoral uncertainty, the people of Costa Rica are preparing to elect a new president for the next 4 years in the presidential runoff election this coming Sunday. Costa Rican citizens still have a little over a day to reflect on which candidate will be the best option. To vote for next Sunday, they will be choosing between Social Democratic Progress Party candidate Rodrigo Chavez and the National Liberation Party candidate Jose Maria Figueres. According to specialists, neither candidate has a clear majority, with polls predicting a technical tie. They say undecided voters will be the ones typing the scales. And the government of Venezuela supported the resolution approved by the United Nations Human Rights Council against the United States. The initiative is aimed at asking Washington to stop imposing unilateral coercive measures due to the negative repercussions they have on the countries. The document presented by the United Nations had 27 votes in favor, 14 against, and 6 abstentions. In view of the facts, Venezuelan executives denounced the damages caused by the measures imposed by the United States on the country, indicating how this affected the health programs carried out through the state-owned oil company Petróleos de Venezuela, PDVSA. The National Assembly of Nicaragua approved a reform to the General Education Law and a reform and an addenda to the law of the autonomy of higher education institutions, which the authorities assure will guarantee the quality public university education. Preceded by a long debate, the approval of this law comes from the need to tune it up to modern times, taking into account that education is a global public benefit. The legislators of all political parties discuss aspects related to quality, inclusiveness, and integral processes of university management in the training for research and innovation. Lawmaker Walmaro Gutierrez, member of the Education Commission, said that under the new reform, the National Council of Universities will be the only governing body for higher education in Nicaragua. In Colombia, the electoral campaign goes on. Presidential candidates host different activities in view of the next elections scheduled for May 29th. In this sense, the presidential campaign team of Gustavo Petro confirmed that he's starting a tour across the country. First, the stop will be in the department of La Guajira, where he is expected to meet social and political leaders. Next, he will visit Puerto Carreño, Leticia, and Tumaco. Also on Friday, we learned that former Vice President Germán Vargas Lleras held a meeting Thursday with the vice presidential candidate Rodrigo Lara Sanchez, a meeting that could be considered as the first approach between the Radical Change Party and the option presented by Federico Gutiérrez. We move on to other topics. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights evaluates this Friday the request for provisional measures against the decision of the Constitutional Court that ordered the release of dictator Alberto Fujimori. The international body will hold a hearing this Friday to evaluate the petition made by the representatives of the victims of the La Cantuta and Barrios Altos massacres, and which questions the decision of the Constitutional Court that reinstated the pardon and ordered the release of the former Peruvian president. The organism underlined that the measure is dictated in cases considered extremely serious and urgent, and when it is necessary to avoid irreparable damage. The Victims Committee stated that the action has the effect of preventing the carrying out of an act that harms the victim's rights to access to justice. The Brazilian prosecutor's office, arguing lack of evidence, put an end to the investigations into the massacre in the Jacarezinho favela in May 2021. The prosecutor's office of the Brazilian state of Rio de Janeiro requested to close the investigation into 15 of the 28 deaths registered during a police operation in the Jacarezinho favela, indicating the lack of evidence to continue with the investigations. The public prosecutor's office pointed out that no eyewitnesses to the incident were located. With this decision, only 5 investigations are still carried out by the public prosecutor's task force. The governments of Argentina and Bolivia kicked off negotiations for the purchase and exchange of natural gas at preferential prices. At the meeting, authorities from both countries will define the volumes and prices of natural gas for the next austral winter months. It is expected that Argentina will have to accept Bolivia's terms. In this regard, Argentinian ambassador to Bolivia, Ariel Basteiro, said the round of negotiations could last for as many as 10 days, until all annexes to the 2006 contract between the presidents Néstor Kirchner and Evo Morales are signed. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this.
In a world that doesn't stop, we give you space to keep up to date. Take a moment, breathe, and take care of your physical and mental health. Balance your well-being and guide your body. Only on TeleSUR.
Welcome back to From the South. More news now. In the United States, President Joe Biden announced that another 30 countries will join the strategy of releasing crude oil reserves to stabilize the market. Amid the instability generated by the crisis in Ukraine and the extraterritorial sanctions, the United States opted for partial release of its strategic crude oil reserves to increase supply and contain price increases. This Friday, Biden informed that a bloc of 30 consumer countries have joined this plan after being summoned by Washington to an extraordinary meeting to address the issue. The measure, which will add tens of millions of barrels to supply, is part of the West's strategy to reduce dependence on producing countries. On Friday, the Russian Defense Ministry condemned an alleged Ukrainian airstrike on an oil base outside Belgrade, said to have set the depot ablaze. There was no independent confirmation of details about the incident. The ministry also shared footage of a Bastion mobile coastal missile system in action, saying that the high-precision Onyx missile destroyed the UAF command center.
At 5 a.m. Moscow time, April 1st, 2 Ukrainian Mi-24 helicopters entered the Russian Federation airspace at an extremely low altitude. The Ukrainian helicopters raided a civilian oil storage facility located in the outskirts of Belgorod with a missile strike. Several reservoirs were damaged and caught fire from missile hits. Let me stress that the facility served for supplying petroleum to civilian transport only. The oil base has nothing to do with the Russian armed forces.
And the first deputy permanent representative to the United Nations of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Polyansky, told journalists that his country was releasing on Friday a new letter with documentation alleging a military biological program in Ukraine, supported by the United States.
For all this time, we have been seeking clarification from the US side on the true nature of its bioactivity in Ukraine and explanations with regard to the above-mentioned documents. In particular, we asked to clarify why the US Department of State keeps insisting that the US operates no laboratories in Ukraine, while there is a documented proof of Pentagon directly managing these labs, with its subcontractors implementing projects with deadly bioagents. The key question is, why has the Pentagon been so deeply involved in biological projects on Ukraine, contracting the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, if, as the US delegation claims, all these activities are exclusively peaceful? We have received no answer so far. The US, as well as other Western delegations, have been totally dismissive. They refuse to provide any comment of the evidence that has been revealed, labeling it as Russian disinformation.
And President Volodymyr Zelensky reveals that he has loyalty problems among his troops. On Thursday night, he reported that he had dismissed 2 generals, but hinted that they were not the only ones. In fact, the Ukrainian head of state said he did not have time to deal with all the traitors. The president said he had dismissed General Naumov Andriy Olinovich, who serves as the head of Ukraine's main internal security department, and General Kryvoshko or Sergei Alexandrovich, the head of the Ukrainian security service in the Kherson region. The senior officers were removed from their posts for disloyalty. Zelensky said during his message that because he was too busy, he did not have the time to deal with all the traitors, but promised to do so gradually and assured that he will be all punished. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres on Friday welcomed the truce agreed by Yemen's warring parties and expressed hope for a political process to bring peace to the country. The United Nations said earlier that Yemen's warring parties had agreed to a 2-month extendable truce starting on Saturday, the first day of Ramadan for many Muslims, as well as an accord on fuel shipments and Zanaa airport. The announcement comes as discussions on Yemen's devastating conflict take place in Saudi Arabia, which leads to a military coalition supporting the government against the Iran-backed rebels.
And with that renewal, to addressing Yemen's urgent humanitarian and economic needs, and creates a genuine opportunity to restart Yemen's political process. This truce must be a first step to ending Yemen's devastating war. A halt to the fighting, coupled with the entry of full ships and the easing of restrictions on the movement of people and goods in, out, and within the country will contribute to building trust and creating a conducive environment to resume negotiations for a peaceful settlement of the conflict.
And the Pope Francis apologized Friday for the abuse committed at church-run residential schools in Canada, telling indigenous delegations at the Vatican that it caused him pain and shame. After hearing stories of suffering, deprivation, discriminatory treatment, and various forms of abuse, Francis said he joined the Canadian bishops in asking for forgiveness. In a meeting with survivors from the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit Aboriginal groups, Francis asked God's forgiveness for the deplorable behavior of members of the Catholic Church. Some 150,000 First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children were enrolled from the late 18,000s to the 1990s in 139 residential schools across Canada as part of a government's policies at forced assimilation. They spent months of years isolated from their families, language, and culture, and many were physically and sexually abused by headmasters and teachers.
For the deplorable conduct of the members of the Catholic Church, I ask God's forgiveness, and I would like to tell you with all my heart, I am bruised, and I join my brother Canadian bishops in apologizing to you.
And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Less than 50% of Rwanda's population has access to clean drinking water within 30 minutes of their homes, according to UNICEF. People queue to collect canisters of water, but if it's not clean, they put themselves at risk of disease. The alternative is to have water treated by commercial companies, but the cost is too high for the poorest in society. Companies like Iriba are trying to make clean, safe water accessible for everyone. It has a plant in Kigali for purifying groundwater. Workers test the liquid to make sure it is safe. According to the managing director of Iriba Water Group, the purpose of this project is to give people access to clean water, especially those who don't have access to it. They target basically low-income people in markets, in car parking stations, targeting low-income people who can't afford bottled-off water. In South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa made a statement on last July riots that rocked the cities of Durban and Johannesburg. Ramaphosa told to the South African Human Rights Commission that the unrest sought to cripple the economy and weaken the democratic state. The riots began as protests after Ramaphosa's predecessor, Jacob Zuma, was jailed for contempt of court over his refusal to testify before corruption investigations. The unrest left more than 350 dead and cost the economy some 50 billion rand. More than 2,500 people were initially arrested, mostly for minor charges. Zuma was released on health grounds a few weeks later after the riots. One of his corruption trials is scheduled to begin on April 11th.
These hearings form, in my view, an integral part of the healing process that we must go through. It's cathartic, but at the same time, we've got to go through this healing process to get to that moment of healing. We also know there can be no healing without justice. We will spare no effort to ensure that the instigators and perpetrators of the violence are brought to book.
The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees stated that nearly 46,000 people have been displaced after they fled violent clashes in the Democratic Republic of Congo. In the meantime, thousands of children, women and men have arrived from Rutshuru territory, some 8 kilometers from the Bunagana border crossing in Uganda's Kizoro district. In addition, nearly 36,000 people have been displaced within the Democratic Republic of Congo. Most are being accommodated by host families or in markets and schools. Security conditions are making it difficult to reach those affected, but a task force led jointly by the UN Refugee Agency and the World Food Programme is is being established to organize the delivery of humanitarian assistance. And street protests gripped Sri Lanka Friday as demonstrators blocked main roads across the country, a day after hundreds tried to storm the president's home in anger over an unprecedented economic crisis. The latest official data released on Friday showed inflation in Colombo hit record numbers for the 6th consecutive news. Food prices soared 30.1%. Sri Lanka's predicament has been compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic, which torpedoed tourism and remittances. Several state-run hospitals are facing shortages of life-saving medicines. According to some economists, the crisis has been exacerbated by government mismanagement and years of accumulated borrowing, which might explain why a common theme of demonstrators is the demand for government members to quit.
All over Sri Lanka, citizens are gathering to protest because they have not been able to buy even essential supplies. We're all gathered here to protest against this government and all the groups that support this government.
And two South Korean Air Force planes collided in midair during training and crashed near their base on Friday, killing all 4 people aboard the aircrafts. Both planes were KT-1 trainer aircraft that took off from one a force base in the southeastern city of Sechon, one after another for flight training. The Air Force said the collision occurred about 5 minutes after the first aircraft took off and about 6 kilometers south of the Sechon base. A trainer pilot and an instructor were aboard each of the 2 aircrafts. The 4 victims were identified as 2 first lieutenants and their instructors, both civilian employees at the Air Force. And Iran celebrates the 43rd anniversary of the establishment of the Islamic Republic. Through a referendum held on April 1, 1979, the 98% of the participants supported the creation of a republic. Under the leadership of the political and religious leader of the Islamic Revolution, Ruhollah Mossavi Khomeini, the Iranian people thus put an end to 2,500 years of monarchy and established a new political system based on Islamic values and democracy. In a statement issued on Thursday by the General Staff of the Armed Forces, the political system of the Islamic Republic of Iran has been the target of enemies' conspiracies and cruel sanctions since its beginning, making the Persian nation a powerful system in the face of global dynamics. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.